Good morning, middle school. It's week 2 of our online classes. It's Monday, March 30th. And as I've said in all my videos, I miss having you guys here. It's too quiet. You don't hear a sound in the building right now. I miss you guys. But we're going to make this as good as we can. It's not what we would want, but we're going to make it good. So what we're going to do today is we're going to begin our study of the book of Exodus. The second book of the Bible follows right after Genesis. And your Bible booklet that you should have, your Bible booklet looks like this. And you are going to want to open to page 100 for our study now of the book of Exodus. Now, if you look on your booklet on page 101, I mentioned there that the first 5 books of the Bible are known as the Torah. Now, that's what the word Torah looks like in Hebrew. That's their letter or the sound that we have for T. This letter provides the vowel sound. Sometimes it's a consonant, but it provides a vowel sound here, that O. This is their sound R. That's an H, but in the word it's silent, and it's Torah. And the word means law or instruction, guidance. And so the first 5 books of the Bible functioned for Israel as their law or the direction for their lives. And those 5 books, and you can write them on page 101 in your booklet, are Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. And so we're beginning today in our study of Exodus, which is the second book of the Torah, the second of the 5 books of the law. Now, to give you your assignment now, if you look in your booklet on page 102, you'll find that there's a list of words. Okay, there's page 102, and there's page 103, and you are to define those 10 words, and then by your honor code, you're going to let me know that you did them as a homework assignment. There's 10 words there of things that we need to know as we begin our study of Exodus, and that's due tomorrow on Tuesday, March 31st. So 2 things that we need to know as we start the study of Exodus. Now, I put this on the board. This is Exodus chapter 1, verses 6 through 8, which says, "Now Joseph and all his brothers and all that generation died. Then a new king, to whom Joseph meant nothing, came to power in Egypt." So the 2 things we need to know are, number 1, the time frame of the book. And it gives us a time frame here. Now, when we studied Genesis, we studied the family of Abraham. We studied the family of Abraham's son Isaac, and his sons that he had, the twins, Esau the oldest and Jacob the youngest. And then we studied the family of Jacob and his children, as he had 12 sons and 1 daughter. Jacob's oldest sons, his first 10, despised the son, their brother, whose name was Joseph, the firstborn of the wife that Jacob loved, whose name was Rachel. They despised Joseph because their father treated him better than he treated the others. They could tell, they just knew Joseph was favored. Joseph was the apple of his dad's eye, and they hated Joseph for that. And they sold him as a slave to slave traders, who eventually carried Joseph to Egypt, where he was sold into the home of a man named Potiphar, and Joseph then was a slave in Potiphar's house. But God was working in Joseph's life through some very terrible circumstances that happened, and eventually Joseph rises to the position of second most powerful person in Egypt, who was overseeing the entire Egyptian economy. A famine swept through the region, which led Jacob's family, that is Joseph's brothers, to relocate to Egypt, and the family was reconciled. So Joseph, his brothers, his dad, Jacob, all lived in Egypt and were under the blessing of the Egyptians because of Joseph's power and influence. But we're told in Exodus that Joseph and his brothers in that generation that relocated to Egypt had died. And that's important because as far as we know, the time frame from Joseph's death to where we are in Exodus, God was silent. And the time frame for that was 400 years. In other words, from the time of Joseph's death to the time Exodus starts is roughly equal to the time when the Pilgrims came to America in 1620 to where we are now in 2020. And we have no record of any speaking, of any communication between God and his people during that time. It doesn't mean he may not have, that he didn't talk to different people or communicate to them, but as far as we know, we have no record that once Joseph and the family died, that God was communicating with his people during those 400 years. So the first thing is, it's a time frame, and what this means is, as far as we know, there was silence from God to his people. That brings to the second thing. It says there a new king came to power in Egypt, to whom Joseph meant nothing. After 400 years, how many people would even know who Joseph was, let alone how he rescued Egypt from a famine that had swept the region at that time? I mean, 400 years is a long time. We can trace in my family, through my father's side, back to the American Revolution. I am known as a son of the American Revolution because I have a relative in our family who fought in the Revolutionary War. Well, that was what, 250 years ago. I can't get past that. We don't have records beyond that to what our family was like before the American Revolution. Some people can't get back that far. But how many people can trace their roots back 400 years to relatives that they had? Well, here 400 years have passed, and now there's a new Pharaoh, a new king in Egypt. That king didn't know who Joseph was, didn't care to know who Joseph was. All of that happened was a memory that had disappeared. And that led to then the second thing we need to know about the story of enslavement. Because the people of Israel had begun to prosper, they had begun to grow in numbers. In fact, they became so vast in their numbers that the new Pharaoh was concerned that they were so many of them. What are we going to do if they decide they don't want to be here working for us anymore? And so they enslaved them with hard labor to crush any thought that the Israelites might have of rebelling. So here's what this enslavement meant for them. It meant that they had no rights. They had no future. All they knew for all of these years was we're going to be here and there looks like there's no change. No future, no plans, no hopes, no decision making. They were told what to do and when to do it. No options, no possibilities. They couldn't think, well, maybe we'll do this next year, or maybe we'll start this project. All they had was they were part of the enslaved labor in Egypt, building things for the Egyptians, and that's all they knew. No freedom, no place in the culture other than being slaves to do the work that they were told to do for the Egyptians. And so after 400 years, from when Joseph was the second most powerful person in Egypt, now, 400 years later, the family is enslaved. And those two things, the time frame of 400 years and what we know, what appears to be no communication from God, this time of silence, and the enslavement of all the descendants of Joseph in Egypt, that forms the backdrop. That forms the context for what we're going to study in the book of Exodus. And remember, your homework due tomorrow is to do the definitions on page 103 and 104, 10 words that you're to define there, And by honor code, you'll let me know tomorrow that you looked those up and you have the definitions done. I'll be back tomorrow on Tuesday. It's good to be with you today. I'm out.